I'm Berith Karlsson of Henok Kulturbryggeri, and this is the Brewer to Brewer podcast from All About Beer. My guest today is Henok Fentie of Omnipojo, and he is here for a conversation that goes beyond the brew house and into topics that matter to brewing professionals and curious beer drinkers. But first, I have to inform a little about that you can visit allaboutbeer.com and also follow on social media at All About Beer. And to support journalism in the beer space, check out patreon.com/allaboutbeer. We'll get into the conversation in just a moment, but first, a message.
First Tea is a proud sponsor of the Brewer to Brewer podcast. With winter chill settling in, now is the time to take advantage of the toasted rice and fresh green character of Genmaicha tea in saisons, lagers, and cream ales. Looking for other new ideas? Email info@firsttea.com. That's FIRSDTEA to find the right teas and botanicals for your next project. And attention brewers, registration is now open for the 2024 Best of Craft Beer Awards. Now in its 10th year, this is a BJCP sanctioned event judged by fellow brewers, professional judges, and industry leaders. Judged in Oregon, it's the third largest professional brewing competition in North America, and it's your chance to have your hard work evaluated and rewarded. In addition to traditional styles, new this year is the smoothie sour style category and the collaboration competition. Register your beers through January 31st, 2024 by visiting bestofcraftbeerawards.com/register. Don't delay, learn more, and get your beers signed up by visiting bestofcraftbeerawards.com/register.
Okay, let's get into this. I will present my guest a little, Henok Fentie. In 2010, he co-founded the Swedish brewery Omnipojo, and together with a graphic designer named Carl Grandin, he shared the vision of changing the perception of beer forever. Henok has since created and released over 600 beers in 60 markets worldwide and continues to rank amongst the top beer producers in the world. Early on, Henok started experimenting with unconventional brewing methods, ingredients, and serving techniques, such as putting frozen foam on top of ice cream beer. Often drawing inspiration from the culinary world and the world in general, Henok's work has spawned a plethora of smoothie and pastry beers on the one hand, but also beers such as the much debated Yellow Belly Stout, a comment on institutionalized racism. Henok believes that beer is pop culture and that it has every right to sit alongside other cultural expressions such as music and art. As of today, Henok runs a production facility in an old deconsecrated church in Stockholm, in Sundbyberg, and Omnipojo bars in Sweden, Germany, and Japan. So, welcome, Henok, to this conversation. We have known each other since a range of years already, and just recently we made a co-brew together. But can you please tell a little about the first time that we met? Do you remember that?
I remember it vividly, Berith, and thank you again for inviting me to be a part of this show. It's a huge honor, and as a massive fan of you and HG and Henok Kulturbryggeri for essentially as long as I can remember, being a baby beer geek back in 2006. Sitting in this show with you is a bit surreal to me. But I remember vividly coming out to Örebro, to a suburb of Örebro, into a space where you guys are still housed today, to hand label Närke Stormaktsporter. I think it might have even been Kaggen, the barrel-aged version of that beer. And in 2006, that beer was the number one rated beer on ratebeer.com in the world, if I'm not remembering it wrong. And it was a pretty surreal experience. People would fly into Stockholm to buy 1 or 2 bottles at Akkurat, which is a bar in Stockholm that used to rank, and probably still does, as one of the best beer bars in the world. And all of a sudden, there we were sitting in the room, hand labeling those small 25 cl bottles of that precious liquid. It was an amazing experience.
I remember that you told me about that you were studying, I think you were studying economics in London, and then you got in contact with the founder of Swedish pubs called Bishop Arms. And then you got into Bishop Arms. You worked for Bishop Arms for many years, didn't you?
Yes, I studied in London for about 3.5 years, and up until that point, I was probably in my early 20s. I had never had craft beer, which is a bit remarkable, because living in England, you kind of think of going to the pub to drink a pint of cask ale as craft beer. I probably didn't do that for those 3.5 years because I didn't have my eyes open to it. So I was drinking Carling's incredibly bad cheap lager blended with soda and such typical student stuff in London at the time. And as I came back, I'd gotten to know a fellow named Vicky Chakraborty who owned a pub chain, rightly so, called the Bishop's Arms. And I started to work for him for the head office of that pub chain. And all of a sudden, 23 taps of craft beer presented themselves to me. And I started essentially deep diving into everything from Swedish craft beer at the time to American beers coming over, in various shapes and forms, IPAs that were kind of 2 or 3 months, or maybe even 5 or 6 months old at the time. But it completely opened my senses to what this thing could be, and I worked there for about 6 years. So yeah, that's right. I met craft beer in that very same moment I met Närke, which is pretty amazing introduction to craft beer, I think.
And you visited us in the brewery together with the pub managers from the different Bishop Arms pubs in the whole Sweden, and then you labeled the bottles yourself with the bottles that you bought for the pubs, didn't you? It was like
yes,
yeah,
handcraft. Talk about handcraft. It was a very amazing experience. I mean, even back then, it was pretty clear that you guys were doing something quite different from what the rest of the scene were doing. But I mean, it was a very, very big leap from macro lager for me to drinking IPAs and light beers, and then let alone going into imperial stouts, 9, 10 ABV and up, and it's heavily inspired me for the rest of my journey, as you can see.
I mean, Bishop Arms pubs, they have done a lot in the different cities for the beer culture in Sweden, I must say, and they serve local beers here and there, and this company started 10 years before we started, so there must not have been very much craft beer from the beginning, but then it happened. So what did you think about the development about this? Because it was like a volcano.
Yeah, no, that you're absolutely right. I mean, Bishop's Arms started in '93, and in Sweden at the time, my understanding was that they had 6 beers on draft, and Czech beers, German beers, English beers were available, so you could start there and then slowly kind of develop and incorporate all the new developments that were coming, that came over time. And I think when I started in 2006, one of my earliest tasks was, okay, how do we figure out how to add younger people to our customer list? And it was, for me, pretty challenging because an English style pub isn't exactly something that I associate with youth. It's very cozy and quiet atmosphere. Great, for my age now, perhaps. I'm 40 plus. But at the time, it felt like it felt a little bit of it felt like it was a little bit of a challenge until this kind of very clear youth-driven, partly craft beer revolution started making some noise, which I think for me was around that time. I mean, these pretty modern beers coming over from the US and kind of also from an artwork perspective, quite progressive outlook on what beer could not just taste like, but also what it could look like. And so that was kind of the mantra that we were traveling around with was, okay, we're not going to add younger customers to our customer base by updating the food or the music, but it's going to be by having the best selection of craft beer that we can possibly have. And I think Bishop's Arms really developed during those years into a place in smaller cities, mostly, where you would be the number one choice for people that wanted to drink great craft beer.
Yeah. But suddenly, during this time, you decided to try to make your own beer. You were a home brewer for some years, weren't you?
Yeah, I mean,
what happened?
I mean, I think back of it, and it's luckily in massive naivete, like the idea of making beer at home came, dropped like a bomb to me. Like most home brewers, like I can make alcohol at home. Like let me try that. Let me try and see what that gives. While at the same time, being surrounded by all this amazing beer, I think my first attempts at home brewing were quite disappointing. Like I knew what could be made, and the results were more or less, undrinkable until I brewed a dark beer. And so that kind of like got me into the, kind of idea of, okay, how can I keep brewing this for friends and family at different, gatherings and make it, more and more exciting, given also what I've seen, what you guys were doing and a couple of other producers. I remember De Molen in the Netherlands and Menno at the helm being a huge inspiration early on as well in terms of brewing dark, big, bold beers. But it wasn't until a couple of years later, until more or less kind of towards the end part of my journey with the Bishop's Arms, that I've started thinking about what would happen if we were to brew something commercially somewhere and try to release it. And that was a completely different driver and motivation for me. Simply put, I kind of felt like I was forcing my friends to go to beer bars because I wanted to drink great beer, but they just wanted to go somewhere else, in terms of atmosphere. And this idea of trying to brew something that could be a gateway drug into craft beer, like something very drinkable, but that still had, the allure of American tropical hops, came as I had a sabbatical year in Belgium towards the end of my journey at the Bishop's Arms. And so the first beer, Lavon, which is a champagne yeast blonde ale, dry hopped lightly with Amarillo and Simcoe, kind of came into the picture. So it was a very different, it was kind of home brewer brewing dark beer. And then first commercial beer that comes out is a blonde ale, the like Belgian equivalent of a macro beer, essentially, but with a little bit of American hops in it.
Because when this happened, you didn't start a brewery. You brew your beer in other breweries, huh? And I remember that we and some other brewers, we made jokes about this, and we thought it was a little lazy not to have your own brewery, and we never yelled at each other, Henok, but I know we made jokes about this, and you just laughed and said, well, this is my style, and we'll see, and I like the beer. And do you remember our meetings at that time?
I definitely remember them, and to be fair, I harbored and I still do immense respect for brewers who have their own brick and mortar brewery, and 10,
I have
15
respect for your
later,
way too,
yeah, no, but 10, 15 years later, here I am, and
Yeah.
honestly, like I more now than ever before, I see the struggles and the everyday life that goes into having your own production facility. But for me to be completely transparent from the very onset, I figured this would be a hobby project, and so for me, which I think kind of made it less dramatic in the sense that I just wanted to get beer out that transmitted a message around kind of where we wanted to craft beer to going forward. Like I wanted to be a part of the movement and the discourse going forward. And the fastest and most um, fair way for me to do that without, starting to brew something that, was undrinkable or otherwise, was to go and learn from someone. And I think in that journey, like meeting Dirk Nods at the Proof Brewery was hugely transformational for me and formative as a young aspiring commercial brewer. Just being able to hang out at that brewery and seeing, getting to pick his brains around how he was thinking about beer and brewing, and it was almost like a free course into commercial brewing, but while at the same time getting feedback and people's opinions about what would work and what would fly and not on a commercial level by releasing beers coming out. And I even remember a pin from your brewery that said something about the proof as we were brewing there, which I thought was quite quite succinct. What was the message on that pin again?
Yeah,
If you don't have,
perhaps I can say it, and if it's not vad heter det, correct for the pod, they can cut it out, because we wrote like this: if you don't have the nuts, the proof got the guts.
That's it. And
Yeah.
I didn't know the nuts. That was
Yeah.
no,
But we made some jokes about this, and we called it Kukuk breweries, because the Kukuk bird puts his eggs in different other nests from other birds and stuff like that. It was a hard discussion then, but I really must say the most interesting thing is what comes out of it, and if the beer is good, that's good. So really, this is really a part of our humor, and we also make some really nasty things about ourselves, like we make strong beers, for instance, and we put them on oak barrel, and we say, if it didn't taste okay, use oak. So
or dry hopping or other. I mean, I've heard every. Yeah, but I mean, I think, but the beauty of it to me, and this movement in general is that we're supplying variety, right? And I think it's not just variety of beers; it's variety of ideas and approaches and methods and business models and what have you. And I think today it's much more varied in terms of everything. Like I even want to go as far as saying people that worked with craft beer back then looked different. They were, they were men mostly, and not a very multicultural environment to move around in. I think even that's changed over the past 15 years, and I'm seeing a lot of positives in that. With that said, sure, like we still get like a lot of feedback around how we work and what we do. But then again, that's what makes it all the more rewarding. I had to work for your for your respect, Berith.
Yeah.
15 years later,
I work for yours too. And and I know that there are people in the beer scene that they really can't stand what you are doing, and this is interesting because beer is beer, and the beer is 10,000s of years old. And in the latest podcast from Brewer to Brewer, I talked to Matthias Trum from Schlenkerla in Germany. And I mean, he brews from the purity laws of the Deutsche Reinheitsgebot, and you're allowed only to use malts and hops and water and yeast. And when I asked him about this, I must admit, you don't need other stuff, but people always put other stuff in their beer for changing the taste. They used herbs, they used fruits, and just the things that you do, people have done that for 10,000 years. So it's really nothing new that you're doing, and it's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which it was a great interview, by the way. I was listening to it this morning, yours and Matthias's.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
you're right. You're right. I
Yeah,
mean, coming from Belgium, where I was living when kind of Omnipoyo was conceived, that's one market where definitely you see a lot of variety in terms of ingredient choices and so on and so forth. So I agree. Yeah, nothing new.
I hope we will get back to a little more about your fantastic range of ingredients. But first, I wanted to ask you a little about the name of the brewery, because you have a brewery now, and this is in a church it wasn't church in the suburb, or Sundbyberg is a small town really close to Stockholm.
Yep.
So
Yep.
you changed it totally to a brewery, and then tell me a little bit more about that, and also about the name Omnipoyo, please.
Well, yes. So we're 3 years in to the kind of a brewery owner journey of Omnipoyo, and we've been dreaming and thinking about opening our own facility for quite some time. And at some point, I kind of felt like, on the one hand, it has to be small enough not to completely occupy every minute of our day, because we love traveling and learning and working with breweries near and far. So we want it to be quite free in that regard. But on the other hand, as the volumes grew, we also realized if we're going to be able to do anything meaningful, it needs to be at a certain size for it to make sense, both in terms of investment, but also a small brewery and a big brewery kind of requires the same amount of time. As you know, Berith, it's labor intense, even if it's a small batch. So I wouldn't say it's a mid-sized brewery. It's a pretty small brewery, but it's still quite a lot of volume for us that we can brew here. And so it's become a very exciting part of our portfolio. I would say about 80% of what we produce is produced here at the church right now, which I'm enjoying. This church is called Omnipoyos kyrka, which kyrka means church in Swedish. And the name Omnipoyo, I get that question every tasting I do. It's always a long, cumbersome answer to that question. But simply put, it's a combination of two words. One, which is omnipotence, and the other one, which is pollo, which is the Spanish word for chicken. And the reason for that is, when the kind of idea of the brewing operation came to be, there was an idea that it could take us places, like a bird that could fly. Weirdly enough, pollo might not be the bird that you would think of as a bird that would fly pretty far and near, but it's a trip to Spain, to Grenada, and the idea of having a bird as part of the name kind of rendered the name Omnipoyo. So that's kind of where it comes from. We have a tap room too, so if anyone wants to come by at some point, we're ready to receive you.
Yeah. So now your chicken has flew around the world, Henok. And we will talk a little more about that after a short break. So we talk again after the break.
First Tea invites you to talk tea for a sec. The crisp, clean notes of a classic Pilsner provide the perfect space for Genmacha's tea's toasty, rice, and fresh green tea character. Contact the team at First Tea about how to use Genmacha's green tea and other botanicals by emailing info@firsttea.com. That's FIRSDTEA. And attention brewers, registration is now open for the 2024 Best of Craft Beer Awards. Now in its 10th year, this is a BJCP sanctioned event, judged by fellow brewers, professional judges, and industry leaders. Judged in Oregon, it's the third largest professional brewing competition in North America, and it's a chance to have your hard work evaluated and rewarded. In addition to traditional styles, new this year is the smoothie sour style category and the collaboration competition. Register your beers through January 31st, 2024 by visiting bestofcraftbeerawards.com/register. Don't delay, learn more, and get your beers signed up by visiting bestofcraftbeerawards.com/register.
Okay, Henok. Your chicken has flowed around the world, spreading the beer culture and your very, very different beers. So tell me about your world tour.
Well, I mean, I think when you were talking to Mattias Trummach, you talked at quite some length about Systembolaget. I think
Yeah.
as a Swedish beer producer, you always have to have a relationship or not a relationship to the fact that you sell beer through one store. I think Systembolaget is great, but at the time, again, back to the idea of being a bit cautious around kicking this off as a business, but rather more as a hobby project, I actually found it easier to conceive of the fact that we could send beer to the US than to sell beer through Systembolaget. And the reasons for that are many. One of them being, as a contract brewer, there was just not a natural way of selling beer through Systembolaget, because the system isn't designed for that. Rightly so in many regards, but for us it just didn't make sense. But also the fact that we were focusing on quite extreme beers, if you will, and I think that finding small pockets of enthusiasts in, say, 45 countries was easier for us than finding one big market in Stockholm or Gothenburg or across Sweden. So we started exporting our beer pretty early on. And one thing that was very important for that to happen was garnering good ratings on ratebeer.com or other similar forums. And so it was a chase for high ratings. I remember checking ratebeer.com out probably like 10 times a day the first couple of years, just to make sure our beers were faring well. And it was very clear that when they weren't selling that well, and when they were selling well. So that was really kind of a driver for our a vehicle for us to get out into the world. But it's been an exciting ride. We still export to about 45 countries today. And we started with, I think, 12, and then kind of added one or two more markets every year. And today we're in 45. Some of them we send beer to, and some of them we brew locally and sell in, which I also think has always been quite important to me. Is okay, how can I get beer out in the best shape and try to transmit an idea? If it's brewing locally and selling it fresh, I'd much rather do that than sending beer, let's say, across the Atlantic that's hoppy or something.
Yeah, that's a risky trip.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now it's really I admire the success of Omnipollo, because in Europe we sometimes say that all roads end up in Rome. So there are really a lot of different ways to run a brewery, and no method is the best or the worst. So you have to find your own road. That's the thing.
I agree, and Närke Kulturbryggeri is a testament to that in many ways. I mean, you still manage to walk your path very, very clearly, irregardless of trends, and other things that are happening around you. Very much to the delight of beer drinkers and enthusiasts around the world, which I think is, again, super inspiring, while at the same time being open to inviting a nut job like me to a podcast. I think it's you have both of those. But we have worked with quite a lot of brewers over the past years. I want to say, out of the 600 somewhat beers we've made, at least 2/3 of those are collaborations. And I think that one thing that kind of unites every single one of those brewers that we've worked with, some that are first generation and some that are many generations back, is curiosity. And I think that's always been kind of a joy to be a part of going forward, regardless of which path you choose.
And this is interesting because you also present your project like beer is a culture just like other cultures, like music and art and stuff. And we also think in that way because why do you do collabs? Because it's the same thing with musicians. They jam together. And if you're a choreograph, you want to work with other dancers and stuff like that. So really, it's the same. It's culture, and you're creating something. So I was happy to do this co-brew from Närke and Omnipojo just recently, and we are going to do one in our brewery also in some time, a short time, I hope. And it was so interesting, and you learn so much from talking to the team in the brewery, and how. Can you tell me a little about how you are thinking when you are creating a taste, when you choose your raw materials and stuff that you put into a beer? Because you put this stuff into the beer also during the process, don't you? Tell me about this.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, it was wonderful having you guys over. You're making me nervous now that unless you have to say that you're happy after you try the beer.
I tried it halfway.
Halfway.
It tells me this is going to be good.
No, but it's going to be great. It's a team favorite already. It's resting in bourbon barrels now. It's an amazing beer. I'm not going to spoil too much about what it is until it comes out. But I mean, we try to. It's every year is different for us in a sense, because I almost feel like every year I meet a brewer or have a brewery experience that changes my perception of what this process is all about. What if I try to kind of see one common thought that's been, with us from the very start, is that I usually find that if I can explain what the beer is pretty easily and it's intuitive, it's less risky. And so I try to kind of like have a, quick conversation with my kids or something around what the beer is. If they understand what it is, like, hey, it's a pancake beer, then it's I don't see a huge risk in adding maple syrup and vanilla to a stout. It's usually an easy. If I have to start explaining what it is to a great length, it usually becomes a beer that I tend to enjoy slightly less. And so it's become quite like simplified in the sense that I try to basically see it as, hey, if I can explain it very easily. I'm pretty straightforward when it comes to flavors. Like I don't go quite risky, although that might be what people associate it with. Like if we add bacon, for example, which on the one hand could be considered as risky or maybe a bit unconventional, that will go into a beer that we have all the confidence it will be able to take that ingredient, and it will also be something that we've tried out and tested, and I'm pretty low on the risk spectrum, but I'm pretty high on the idea of, okay, if it says that it's something on the bottle or the can, you better taste that that's what's in the beer once it comes out, without losing too much balance or similar. But yeah, so basically an intuitive, childish approach is kind of.
Do you think there's any limit about for what you can put in a beer?
I don't. I mean, I don't envy winemakers in that regard, because there are definitely limits to what you can put into a wine. But with beer, unless it harms your body, more than let's say what alcohol does, I don't see that there's a limit actually. I think you can work with savory. I think you can work with sweet. That there's no limit, honestly. I even work with fat. I know that that's something that a lot of brewers swear.
What did you work? Sorry, I didn't hear. You work
with fat, like fatty flavors.
Okay. Yeah.
So we've used butter, cream, a bunch of other things. I think that's it's a question of like trying to figure out how to use the ingredients, not if or and why rather. I think it was a pretty interesting exercise to build a brewery with a German equipment provider. So we worked with Braucon in the end, but we had tenders out with a bunch of different equipment providers. They are the best in the world of building breweries, as far as I'm concerned. But the challenge was, to a large extent, to have these conversations with German equipment providers around what we wanted to do. The specifications were more or less, we're home brewers, but we want to brew 80 hectoliters of imperial stout with this and that adjunct and this and that Play-Doh. And it was a quite tall order in terms of what the system was supposed to do. The question that often came up, not from Braucon, but just generally when we were discussing this, was why would you want to do that rather than how can we do it? How can we make it work? And I think that's, to me, it was a kind of a slightly different approach. I mean, I think it's great because it's most interesting things happen, in that intersection between, tried and tested, traditional and new, and slightly more boundary pushing, if you will, if you want to use those words. Ideas. And I think most of our collaborations, for example, that have been my favorite beers have been when we've brewed with a brewery that has a very strict idea about what they do. And we try to exercise, ideas about what we do. And that meeting, which I also honestly think applies to the beer that we're brewing together. I mean, most of those beers I tend to enjoy it slightly more than when it's two very similar breweries working together.
But this ingredient, to put fat in the beer, it could be a very beer without foam. So I just created a new button. Would you like to hear it?
Yes.
I'm not only in it for the foam.
That's it.
Perfect.
That's exactly it.
You can use it too, Henok.
No, but I mean, it's like, to be fair, that's usually, I mean, it's a question of taste too. It's like, it depends on what style it is to me as well. Like we brew a lot of lager beer. Now we have our own brewery, and it's like, it's a very different approach to me that goes into that than when we're brewing something dark or something hoppy, for example. I remember brewing a beer in the US, in Maryland, at a brewery called Dog. This is in 2014. And we thought we were brewing a West Coast double IPA, and it came out looking like pea soup, super hazy. And at the time, we had pre-printed our bottles, 75 CL bombers, which is like the way to sell beer in the US at the time. So we'd spend all our money essentially on these pre-printed bottles, and the beer came out completely hazy. And the brewery that we were working with called us, and they said, "Hey, we're going to have to dump this beer because it looks like pea soup. You're not going to be able to sell it." And it was just not an option because we would have gone bankrupt. So we asked them to send us samples of it, and it was a hazy beer, very soft, beautiful aroma. But it did look very hazy, and I called around to a bunch of friends and asked, how long will this take to settle, and what should we do, and we released the beer anyway, and kind of like embrace the haze slogan, blah blah blah. And what do you have it? 9 years later, everyone's drinking hazy beer. 10 years later, as if it's always been around, And I think. And in a way, it kind of has through like wheat beer and similar. But it's like, I think the visual aspect of our beers is, on the one hand, super important because we have a marketing tool that is social media. But on the other hand, it's kind of unimportant. It's like, as long as it tastes good and smells amazing, it's kind of if a stout has foam or not isn't gonna make my life better or worse.
No. And when you also look historically on this matter, it's a very short time in human history that we are drinking out of glasses, because we use the wooden glass, wooden drinking. Vad heter det, Henok?
Vessels, yeah.
Vessels, yeah, and
yeah,
also
stein.
ceramic, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I love talking to you about everything. It's like you always put it into perspective, you know. And I think I was very occupied with, in the very early days, I was very occupied with, okay, I don't have a brewery. How do I not offend anyone more than that? You know? And then after a while, it just became, okay, let me just forget about that and try to, you know, not offend, you know, as many people as possible, but let's just, you know, let me just do something that I feel like doing. And it kind of just like fell into place. So much other things happened. So many other breweries opened that no one cared anymore. So, and then, yeah, other stuff happened, you know, kind of came along with that. But I agree. It's but I must say though, as I've grown older, I think, and you know, I've ABV, like alcohol content, has gone down in our beers slightly. And we're more focused on executing within styles. You know, when that's the exercise at hand, like lager beers and hoppy beers specifically is a very big focus for us here at the church, and we really want to nail them, you know, rather than push and innovate within the category when it comes to those beers, like the kind of more easy drinking beers that are designed to be that way.
Yeah, I think one of the most impressive things about Omnipollo beers is that you make super good pastry stouts and super good Pilsner beers. And that's a great range of taste, really.
Thank you, Berith.
Yeah. You said you were going into this project, or you presented that like that anyway. So for changing what people think about beer, and it should be changed forever. And you also, I mean, today we have some movements in Sweden. We have a group of women, feministas. They are making beers they are women brewing and for women, and we have a discussion about equality and not harassments in pubs and in the working life and stuff like that. And you also are talking about you want to comment on institutionalized racism. Can you tell me a little about that, Henok?
I think, you know, for me and Carl, so Omnipollo has always been a dialogue between first me and Carl, my co-founder and partner, and today between everyone who works at Omnipollo as we've grown bigger as an organization. But I think that for me, running a company was always going to be about, you know, trying to bring who we are into the project. And I think that a lot of, you know, the conventional wisdom kind of says that, you know, don't mix business and politics. And I think that has been super hard for me because I just don't see it as separate things. Politics is everywhere. And so for me and for Carl, pretty early on, as we were having, especially when we were traveling, as we were having conversations about, you know, beer and the world, it kind of became pretty natural for us to incorporate what we were talking about in the world at the time into our different beer projects. And it could be anything from the beer in itself to the artwork that was going onto the cans, to the communication around the beer and the can or the bottle. And I think Yellow Belly is probably the most obvious example of a situation where we were frustrated because of a EU election that had just occurred, like taken place in Sweden, where a right-wing party kind of came out much higher than they were polled and estimated to come out at, because people were walking out of the poll saying one thing and then in reality they'd voted for another party. And at the same time, we'd been paired together with a brewery in England, amazing friends of ours called Buxton Brewery, for a project called the Rainbow Project. And in that project, you'd been assigned a color of the rainbow, and with that color, you were supposed to create a beer. And there were amazing breweries part of this project, and we kind of felt that we needed to not just make an amazing beer, but also have try to bring in some of our thoughts on the trip, literally over to England to go brew that beer. And so we came up with this concept of a cowardice act, and tried and wove that into the Yellow Belly beer, which is essentially a bottle with a cloak on top of it with 2 holes in it, kind of provocative imagery for something that was really an anti-racist kind of manifestation in our minds. And the one thing, going back to the beer again, was okay. Craft beer is, and on the one hand, natural ingredients and crafty process. And here we were as a contract brewery using unnatural aromas in a craft beer. So it's like, on the one hand, let's brew a craft beer according to all the rules surrounding that, like be super rigorous around it. But let's also try to use technology to accentuate flavor. So we made a peanut butter biscuit stout with no peanuts, butter, or nuts. And that was kind of a way of saying, hey, this is something that says it's one thing, but it's not. It's not a peanut butter biscuit stout. It's just an imperial stout, a delicious imperial stout, but with peanut butter aroma. Back to the nuts. We keep going back to that, Berith. But it's, and I think it just, with Carl's amazing imagery, kind of came together as being more. And that brings us back to the idea of it being pop culture. Like, this is not a question of someone going to work 9 to 5 to make, malt beverage and go home again. It's our life. And I think that beer, amongst other beers that we've released over the years, hopefully tells the story of people behind the beer, and this being our entire platform. It's like making music and saying it's not, don't mix music and politics. I mean, it's you wouldn't hear that,
I have another button which we used for many years, which says beer is always politics.
You have a button for everything. We should definitely we have to make a collaborative button for collaborative beer. Seriously.
Yeah, because it's really, because there are so many laws telling about what can you write on a label. For instance, we had a beer called Rainbow Warrior, and it was meant to be our manifestation for equality, for human rights and stuff like that. And we were not allowed to put that on the label because there can't be politics on the label. So we made a beer which was called Internation Ale.
Oh, yeah.
And the text under the name was "Beer is always politics," and that was approved. Can you understand this, Henok?
This is, I mean, it's. I mean, I think, there's definitely a pushback on the idea of bringing yourself into the business if it doesn't rub everyone the right way, and that kind of like. It's a bit hurtful, because there's so many. I mean, there are 400 plus breweries just in Sweden. How many are there in the world? I think 5 years ago there were like 36,000 or something on rate beer. Today it's probably twice that. Like, you're not going to bring yourself into, then what are we doing? It's like it's a little, kind of falls short. But I agree. I mean, you guys have always. It doesn't. It's not. It doesn't come. It comes very natural for you guys to bring yourselves into it. I mean, you can feel you and Håge in the beer, in every beer that's come out of Närke, which is amazing.
So I just recently talked you into our small scale independent brewers association in Sweden.
Yep.
So now you're a member. Omnipoyo is a member. Thank you, Henok. And the more we get, the stronger we will be. So what are you thinking about the Independent Brewers Association in Sweden? What are you waiting for?
Yeah, I mean, I've always felt like an outsider everywhere in my entire life. Uh, and I think as a contract brewer, I definitely felt like I was an outsider in terms of the Swedish brewing scene. And I think having our own facility and, the kindness of yourself being invited, it felt very natural. And we're all very excited about it. I mean, I think the entire team at Omnipoyo feels like, okay, this is another step, to coming home. As we've been, as you say, the chicken has flown all over the place, and it kind of feels like, we are staying put more in Sweden. I think, being part of the community, helping the community achieve its goals is just been a natural kind of next step. But also, again, back to the idea of feeling like an outsider, I think this definitely kind of takes some of that feeling away from it. And yeah, we'll see. I mean, we've just joined. We'll try to help as much as we can. I think this is a tough couple of years that we have behind us and maybe in front of us in terms of craft beer as a whole. I think we shrunk for the first time the segment this year. If you compare it to other years, it's been like double-digit growth, 5 years ago, and now it's a tougher market with inflation and a bunch of different things. Like now more than ever, it's going to be important that some of these political decisions that might help the craft beer scene gets pushed along. And I think the Independent Brewers Association is gonna be a key part in making that happen.
Yeah, we have some work to do together.
Definitely.
Yeah. Henok, I think that together, you and me and all the other different brewers in Sweden and in the world, we can help saving this world. I don't really know how it will happen, but I believe it will happen because beer is the answer to many questions. It's socializing people, it's a culture, and it was always here. After that, we left our nomad life and started to grow grains. So it changed the society. So I hope it also will help rescuing it.
I totally agree. I mean, you're such a, optimistic person, Berith, and it's very, very inspiring. And, from a consumer perspective, I just wonder, like, will people just be able to go back now that the door is opened? Beer can taste different. It can be many things. I just don't see a world in which we all of a sudden wouldn't have choice. Like that's I have a hard time seeing that happen. It's gonna get tough for sure. But I think people will vote with their wallets, and I think that they will choose variety over the opposite over time.
Henok, we are soon reaching the end of this show. Is there anything that you want to complete our talk with? Perhaps something that I didn't think of or you didn't think of until now?
I mean, it's such a pleasure to talk to you always, Berit, and I'm deeply humbled and happy to be invited to come and have a chat with you. And honestly, I look forward to coming over and brewing at your brewery. That's going to be very interesting. And I wonder how that will change my perspective on what I see in the process of making beer for 2024. So be ready. I'm going to ask a lot of questions when I come.
We'll see.
Yeah.
I'm so happy that you said yes when I asked you to be in this show. I admire you and your beer, and I also admire your team because you have a very nice atmosphere in your group, and I love that. It's important for your results to have a nice atmosphere.
Definitely, we've been blessed to attract some of the nicest and most skilled people in the world to come work with us to build this project, and I couldn't be happier. And I'm happy you share that view after having been with us not just one day but several times. You've been to the church a bunch of times, delivering beers if nothing else.
Yeah, and drinking your beers at your pub in the central of Stockholm, Omnipojos hat. So
Yes.
it's a nice and very nice pizzas also there. Okay, Henok, thank you so much for being on this show together with me.
Thank
So
you,
we
Berith. Thank you
will
for having
talk
me.
more about our next project when we are on the phone later in the week and next week and so on. So thank you, Henok.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Berith.
Bye. And Henok will be back on the next episode of this show. And the host, he will be the host, having a conversation with a brewer of his choosing. That will be on the air in 2 weeks or so. And so make sure you tune in for that. Visit allaboutbeer.com and follow on social media. And to support journalism in the beer space, check out patreon.com/allaboutbeer. I'm Berith Karlsson of Närke Kulturbryggeri. Thank you for listening.
This episode was brought to you by Genmaicha. Genmaicha green tea truly dances with saisons, lagers, and kolsch. First Tea is your source for Genmaicha tea and botanicals that fit the season and unique flavor profiles you're looking for. Email info@firsttea.com. That's FIRSDTEA to discover the right teas and botanicals for your next project. And attention brewers, registration is now open for the 2024 Best of Craft Beer Awards. Now in its 10th year, this is a BJCP sanctioned event judged by fellow brewers, professional judges, and industry leaders. Judged in Oregon, it's the third largest professional brewing competition in North America, and it's a chance to have your hard work evaluated and rewarded. In addition to traditional styles, new this year is the smoothie sour style category and the collaboration competition. Register your beers through January 31st, 2024 by visiting bestofcraftbeerawards.com/register. Don't delay, learn more, and get your beers signed up by visiting bestofcraftbeerawards.com/register.